Hi, everyone. I am Carla Kopp, and I'm here with Nikki Valens, and we are in a panel for Metatopia. I completely know what I'm doing, and it's not too early. The panel is my design fell off the rails. Now what? I assure you all, like, I was told what to do, and I definitely remembered. Okay. We're going to be talking today about how game design is kind of messy and weird, and sometimes it just doesn't go in your favor. Like, you want to do something, and then you end up, making a bunch of games about birds, and then, like, somebody's like, hey, you should actually make those games about birds, and then your mind is like, but I hate birds now. But anyway, let's get started with introductions. So I am Carla Kopp. In this industry, I'm like a game designer, developer, publisher. I make content. I do things. It's fine. I do all the things. Um, and the thing that I like just keep designing, like my brain was really on it, was those bird games. But it wasn't just bird games. It was spatial puzzle engine builders about birds. Um, there was too many of those in a row, and, some people would be like, "How many is too many spatial puzzle engine builders about birds?" Probably 2. I made, like, 10 or something before I even realized it. Yeah, like, it's an extreme amount of spatial engine builders about birds. I was alone with my cats for 1 year.
Yeah.
And all we talked about was birds. Well, by we talking, I meant me talking at the cat and the cat looking at the birds. It's
They're good
fine.
listeners.
Yeah, they are. But anyway, I also make a lot of games that have like some sort of spatial component and have cute, cuddly animals. And that typically doesn't fit the genre of the game that it is, but it is what it is. What about you, Nikki?
I mean, those all seem great. Hi, everybody. I'm Nikki Valens. I'm also a game designer in the industry, and I play around a little bit with some, not publishing, but I do a little bit of producer work for my own projects, and just doing like writing or like cultural consulting type stuff as well for various projects. Um, and for the last uh a couple years here, this whole like pandemic lull, I have been cooped up in my home as well, and my uh game mechanic of choice that has consumed all of my brain space has been tactical games, typically tactical combat games, but not always. And yeah, I keep trying to make them in a very specific way that I want, and they never end up being that thing that I want. And in fact, many of them aren't even tactical games by the time I have kind of actually gotten an idea on paper, and it's real weird. So that's what we're doing here, and what is going to be happening. But Carla, you were talking about designing spatial puzzle engine builders about birds, and that you made a lot of them. So I was hoping you could tell me, what do you do when you keep designing games with the same type of mechanism like that?
So what you really want to do is make sure that each game is really different. Like even though they were all spatial puzzle engine builders, like one of them had polyominoes, one of them was hex tiles, one of them had like a lot of player interaction, one of them had very little and less of a focus on the engine. You want to just emphasize different parts of the game more. So if you like happen to make two games that are like pretty similar, you could just like lean hardcore into one of the mechanisms or add a mechanism. Um, or like for the other one, like lean more into the theme or something. Just something to like differentiate between all the games to make them like really unique and different.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And there's so many birds that, every game is gonna be different.
Varying the types of birds involved as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah, each game was a different type of bird, like, I did not even realize I was designing all these like spatial puzzle engine builders. Like to me, I was just designing games that I enjoyed or
Mm,
whatever. And
mhm,
I was introducing them all to my co-designer, and my co-designer, like, it was like 3 days into our like week of like being around each other, and he was like, seriously, Carla, you made another spatial puzzle engine builder about a cute bird? Why are you doing this? Like he was like very like, he not angry, but just, like, he liked birds, and then at the end of that week, he didn't like birds anymore.
I
So,
mean,
like
that seems reasonable given certain contexts.
yeah. And, like, sometimes you can do this without even, like, knowing that you're doing it because there's so many
Mhm,
different kinds, like, with a spatial puzzle, like, what is a spatial puzzle? Like, how many layers of spatial do you have? And the
mhm,
same with engine building because, like, you can have, like, a very linear engine, or you can, like, go really hardcore engine building, like, make engine on engine building. Um,
mhm.
so choosing, like, looking at all your games and making, like, conscious choices to be like, "Oh, okay, so this one is more engine-y and it has, like, all these other options I could do. I'm gonna go hardcore more into the engine and, like, strip out some of the spatial puzzle because, like, that's not as important for this one. But this other one, definitely spatial puzzle, because it is, crows and ravens, like,
Ooh,
their spatial puzzle."
yeah, that makes sense. That's a good theme and mechanics lock-in.
Yeah. So, just think about all those things and push them in certain directions.
Cool.
Um, so you were talking about tactical games. Um,
Mhm.
what do you do when you keep designing games that you aren't currently trying to design?
Yeah. So, like, it's an interesting question because, like, a lot of times I start with, like, a kind of vague thing that I wanna do. Like, for instance, I ended up with Quirky Circuits just because I was like, "Well, what if I made a co-op, programming game?" Or in the case of Artisans, it actually started from, I really wanna make, like, a tactical dungeon crawling type game. Um, and, like, I just kept trying to do that, and, like, my early iterations of what I was of just, like, ideas that I was throwing at the paper just look in no way anything like what Artisans eventually became. And, I mean, Artisans doesn't look even remotely like what I set out to create. It kind of just I mean, it went off the rails and just kinda became its own thing eventually. Um, but I think that in some ways answers the question, like, I ended up with all of these different games that all had extremely different feels. Like, one of them, it wasn't even co-op, it was, like, this weird modular race against the other players. It was like Escape, if Escape was a competitive dungeon delver. And, like, one of them was, uh, this, like, card-based, uh, like, deck builder, but as a dungeon delver. And then, one of them ended up being more narrative, and it had all these other ideas get, like, attached to it as I was working on it, and then I was like, "Oh, this is really neat." But then it was like a bunch of stuff was happening, and I just kind of ended up focusing on one thing, and eventually that became Artisans, but I ended up focusing on the story piece of it and not the tactical piece of it. So I ended up just making a completely different game, but it became something pretty cool, so that's great. But yeah, I mean, what do I do when I keep making games that aren't what I'm trying to make? I think, what you were talking about of using different components and using different specific mechanisms is kind of what I end up doing. Like, each of those different things spawned from the same idea of how can I make a tactical game, but by essentially just approaching it from a different angle with, like, a different mechanic or a different theme sometimes, each of those times that I tried to make it, they all ended up in very different places. And I think it's for that same reason that you were talking about, where, you know, components that you try to use or the types of mechanisms you try to use or the types of themes you try to use lend themselves well to different kinds of games in the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So something that happened to me during the pandemic, so like I made all those bird games.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, Avenel, I cannot. Like I talked to Avenel, saying, like all these things, like, what do I do with these 12 bird games now? And she was actually like, yes, work on one of them. Choose one to work on, and you can pair it with the cat game. And I was like, that makes so much sense. And my brain was like, I hate bird games now. Somebody said to actually work on the bird game. So no. So, like, I was looking for something to pair with the cat game. So I was like, "Okay, my brain cannot do birds because it did birds for probably a year." So I started trying to look at other things. I just wanted a game to pair with this game that I already had. So instead of pairing, like, cats with birds, I had to think, "Okay, what else could cats go with?" And, the obvious answer is more cats. So that gave
I
me
thought
like,
you were gonna say dogs.
no, obviously not. But there is a dog game in that series now. It's just okay, like, I made a weird series of games because, my brain just keeps going off the rails. So eventually there's a dog game in here for other reasons. But this game, I was like, okay, so pairing cats with something, obviously cats, and my brain just, went with it. Also we were eating sushi, so it was like cats like sushi probably because they like raw fish, and it was just like here's the game, and my design brain just went with it because I found like I just pivoted a little about what I was trying to design. Like I had to rethink about it. Like what am I really actually trying to design? Like what is the goal for this? Because sometimes you think your goal is something and your goal is actually like, broader or different or like some
Mm-hmm.
can fit in that little box of I want to design this game.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I can talk about the dogs though. Um,
Do you want to talk about the dogs?
okay, so yes, because so the first game was way too many cats. Okay. And then I made Meow Meow Sushi. But then I was talking to like I had lunch with a friend, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Meow Meow Sushi, that's cute. But like what if instead all of the like instead of being all cats, they could just be all different kinds of animals that are dressing up like dragons instead of cats that were cosplaying as sushi." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, that fits so much better. Like the game, like it's perfect now." And of course, the game is not enough dragons. Okay,
Mm,
so not
okay.
enough dragons. And then we were like, "Oh yeah, so there's way too many cats, not enough dragons. Obviously, the next game is just enough dogs." And
Mm.
like, you say the words "just enough dogs," and I was like, "Okay, yes, you wanna get as many dogs as possible, but not too many," and, I had the whole game design based on the fact that it was just like, "Okay, there's way too many cats, not enough dragons, just enough dogs, and what's the last one? It's, like, only 1 rabbit or something?" That one hasn't been created yet, but, um
The group of games is set though. We know what we're
yeah.
shooting for now. Now we can make
Well
all of the other games that aren't these.
yeah, yes. Well, because it was like, okay, like, the retheme of Meow Meow Sushi into Not Enough Dragons, it was like, how do I now I have a game about dragons when I wanted to create something that would go with the theme of cats and dragons don't make sense, but
I mean,
it
what are
it
dragons if not just big winged cats?
yeah.
Really?
I mean, so, like, having that 3rd game of just enough dogs, it just ties the entire circle together, it makes it fine, and me not, like, as crazy.
I also have to say that as soon as you said animals dressing up as dragons, the first thing that came to my mind was you have all of these different animals. They're all dressed up like dragons. And then, like, down in the corner of one of the art pieces is a hamster that's dressed up like a dragon, just so much smaller than everything else that's in the art.
Yes. That would be so cute. Ah, this is gonna be so cute altogether. Just animals poorly dressed up as dragons. They're cosplay, but they don't have opposable thumbs, so it's hard.
I
Okay.
also like that we've come back around to cute animals,
I
which
mean,
you said earlier was a theme that just kept showing up.
no, like is seriously like this is one of my issues is I make a lot of cute animal themes. And why it's an issue is that I don't solely make light games. So like one of my games, it's called Puffins Love Muffins. It's about puffins that bake muffins that then trade the muffins to get souvenirs, Maine, and they're kind of like they're very particular about their souvenir shelves and they like to label them, etc. You know, which is a very heavy game. Um,
Hmm.
and it's like, but I designed this all because the name Puffins Love Muffins and just thematically just makes sense to my head. Doesn't make sense to a lot of other people about why puffins would make muffins and trade them for souvenirs or
It did
whatever.
make me smile. It's a good name.
Yeah. Well, it's a great name for a light game.
Hmm.
It's a great theme for a light game. But that's another like hard like what do you do with this game where if like you talk to anybody about Puffins Love Muffins and they assume, you know, it's a game for 8-year-old children that plays in like 20 minutes.
Sure. So you have all these ideas that you're saying kind of lend themselves better to small games. So what happens if you're trying to design like a larger experience and you just kind of need to add more into that game? What do you do then?
So I've had different times where I actually like needed well, usually I've had a problem with designing too large and then going down. But recently I've actually like because I've focused so much in the past on small and simple and accessible, is that I just started making like games that were too small and like they weren't the heavy games that like I was working with a publisher that wanted a heavy game and I was like, what? Making it more heavy? What do I do? In that case, I went through the design and I like made a list of all the different moving parts. And then I went through each section and thought about like how I could incorporate different mechanisms into those parts. Of course, my defaults are spatial puzzles, um, but also I like to just add in like area majority, set collection, color theory, and engine building. Like those are easy things to just make something slightly heavier. Like
Hmm.
for area majority, like give somebody points at the end of the game if they have the most, if they did that thing the most.
Hmm.
Or set collection, just add symbols to things, and if they do you know, one of each symbol, they get more points. Or like, well, color theory is kind of cool too, where it's just like, well, if I have a blue thing and a yellow thing, and like I mix them, I'll get a green thing, and that's important for some reason, depending on like the theme or whatever. Um, so yeah, like just thinking about how like the individual little parts could just get slightly a little bit more complicated. And not like complicated just for complication's sake, but like strategy's sake too, to get people to make different decisions. Um
Yeah, a little bit more complication helps to add a little bit more like strategic depth to it. Gives the players more stuff to think about.
Yeah. And that's well one of the really important things is when you add things in, you have to make it so that somebody would make a different decision. If they would just make the same decision that they would if that thing wasn't there, then it's just heaviness for heaviness sake and
Yeah, it's more crunchy. It's just kind of like fiddly work almost.
yeah, exactly. So making sure to analyze it and make sure that, you know, this thing actually adds something is very important with that.
Hmm.
Because it's so easy just to go like, oh yeah, so I'm making a game about I don't know going to the store. There's a dairy section. There's all these sections, but like why is this section? like different than the others. Like it has to have a very important purpose
Mhm.
in the whole overall scheme of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Uh, I feel like a lot of times I'm struggling the opposite direction of that. Like I mentioned earlier, it feels like a lot of times, like, I start designing something, and then when I do go off the rails, it's because I keep thinking of all these cool ideas that I think go well together, and I'm trying to, like, Frankenstein them all together into one thing, and
Mhm.
oftentimes it ends up making the design too large, too complex for what I wanted or what I'm supposed to be making. Um, and, like, that happened with artisans for sure. Uh, like, I I'd been talking about, making trying to make this tactical game, and then, like, a part of the way that I figured out how to, like, run the progression of the dungeon delving at one point was to use story, like a narrative story, and then I was thinking about, like, oh, or it could also be using this other mechanic, like building up your character stuff as you're going could also drive that mechanism forward of wanting you to delve deeper into these dungeons over and over again. Um, and like I kind of explored each of these different ideas that I had, and they all fit really well together. But eventually, I like looked at this like weird abomination that I had created. That although it felt good in the moment to play it, it was like just too big and too much to be able to like actually just be the thing that I wanted it to be. Especially since I set out to make a much lighter, more accessible dungeon crawler type experience. So like one of the things that kind of taught me about how I design and what I want to get out of my designs is to think about your core game loop. Like what is the most important thing that players are doing that they learn how to do and then they can repeat those actions in whatever way that they do them to actually generate this fun experience that you're trying to create. And if you have one of those that stands out the most and is the strongest, like can it stand alone on its own? And what I found with this weird giant creation that I had is I looked at it and there was actually three different game loops in it that all could stand on their own. And I was like, oh, well, this is interesting. I've actually designed three different games in this one thing that I created. And I decided how can I actually break this up and actually have this be three completely separate games where I can have like one that focuses more on the story than it would be able to if it had to carry the weight of these other things. And I had one that was like, well, what if I only focused on this really cool um, level progression mechanic, and it didn't have to care about the narrative story, and it could instead focus on its mechanic and become stronger on its own. And I did that, and I separated these three things out. But then at that point, I was still tasked with making this game. So I was like, well, I have to pick one of these to actually now focus on. And I picked the one that was the more narrative one, the storytelling one, and I started working on that again. Um, and then, as it turns out, I got into this problem originally because this is just how my brain works. I just think of cool things and I want to add them in. This eventually became Artisans, this story-driven, um, like tactical game, but it it still kind of grew from there and kind of added all of these extra mechanisms that it didn't like I didn't intend it to have originally. And weirdly, they're all completely different mechanisms from the other two core game loops that I had. So I think that's an interesting way to think about it and try to break up your game. Like being able to identify your core loop, figuring out what is secondary or even tertiary to that loop and the mechanics, and then being able to, remove some of those that let you focus on that core loop more is, I think, a really powerful sort of introspective design tactic you can take when you're trying to, make something really specific, or even if your design just went off the rails and you need to kind of, refocus yourself and get back to the core of what you want. Um, and it works very well sometimes. For instance, I was completely lost with that Frankenstein abomination of what I was supposed to do with it. But once I realized it was actually 3 games and I separated them out, suddenly I had a direction again. I had jumped rails to a different, you know, a different rail entirely than what I originally was on, but I was at least on the rails again and I could like create something. And even though that design went on to become more than I originally intended, it was a much more focused design and it accomplished its goals much better than it would have if I had continued to try to just force those 3 ideas to coexist when they didn't need to coexist and they weren't actually helping each other as much as they were harming each other.
Mhm. And I wanna stress, like, just how hard this is to do,
Mm-hmm.
to, like, give up, like, on your darlings or your babies. Like, I had a game where the focus of it was color theory, and it was very like, that's why I designed it, that's the starting place. Um, and it took me 4 years, 4 years, like, of people telling me that, like, the color theory part didn't really need to be there, or, like, saying it was too complicated or too heavy. Like, they never actually said, like, "Take this out," or whatever, but then, like, I took it out and it was just a way better game, but it took me 4 years of feedback to be able to, like, actually listen and analyze feedback and, like, just get to the point where I was like, "Okay, yeah, let's just try it without this rule. I'm just gonna cross out this rule and see how it goes," and it was just better. So, I guess the moral of that is that, as long as, if you do it in less than 4 years, you're doing better than me.
Yeah, it is really tough to do it though. Like any times that I've talked to other designers or like designers have asked me for feedback on stuff, that is what it comes down to a lot of the time is like, well, there's this thing here that you clearly care a lot about, but it feels like it's actually harming the design. And it's like really hard to see it in your own work, especially when that's a piece of the design that like you're um like you really like maybe that was one of the things you started with, like, oh, this is the point of this thing. But then, once you started designing it and other pieces got added, it turns out that what you started with is actually holding everything else back. But
Mhm,
it's really hard to see that when you're actually like in the moment designing it. Um, and it's yeah, a lot of times it takes someone else being like, "Hey, what if this just didn't exist?" And like maybe that thought had never even occurred to you. And even after they say it, yeah, there's still like that long moment of like, well, no, that needs to be there because that's like the whole game. And it might take a really long time before you can see or accept that like maybe a piece of this game isn't as necessary to the design as it seems like it is. But it's definitely one of those things that if you can have those moments of introspection in your designs and being able to kind of analyze each piece of the design and how it relates to the other pieces, um, yeah, you have to kind of take that step back.
mm,
And I think I've heard a lot of designers talk about like they have a design that they're working on, and they're not arriving at a solution for whatever issue they're running into. And sometimes they'll just shelve a design. They'll just kind of, put it away. Don't look at the prototype for a year or more or whatever it is. And then when they come back to it, you've kind of lost that like um I'm going to use the word clinginess, but that's not the best word for what I'm trying to describe. That like idea that you need to hold on to these things, cherish them. Uh that kind of fades over time. And maybe when you come back to that design, it uh you see it with new eyes and you go, "Oh, well I could just do this and then it works better." Obviously that doesn't work for everything because if you're like contracted to make a thing in a set time, then you can't just shelve it for a year and call it good. But if it's your own personal designs, that can help a lot sometimes. It's just taking time away from a design.
Yeah. Well, what happened with my design is like I got it to a certain point and I kept on getting the same feedback, so I shelved it for a year and then I took it
Mm-hmm.
out and played it again and got the same feedback and I did that a series of times until 4 years had passed. And, like, so it might you might have to shelve the same thing repeatedly, uh, is like, that's not the worst thing in the world is to, like, take something out, play it, realize, there was a reason why you shelved this thing, shelve
Mm-hmm.
it again, and then come back to it at a much later date. Like, it might take you years to stop being as clingy and weird about that, like, one little aspect that everyone well, not even everyone, that, like, a certain small part of the population hates. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're not gonna be able to just, like, "Okay, let's shelve it for 1 day, and I won't care, like, so much about this." Like, it could take years. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
yeah, I really was like, I wanted that to be important, and then, I think another good aspect to get, like, into just the practice of is if you have a prototype and you know you're stuck on it or something, just play it without a rule. Like, you don't have to actually get rid of that rule and update the rules and update everything and make a, like you don't have to do a lot of work. Just play it without that one rule and then just, write down like, was this better or worse without this one part? And go through
Mm.
your design like that. And if you get used to it, like, oh, okay, yes, this set collection, it's actually super important for the game. There was a reason why I loved it and like kept it in there. Um, it'll make you like be able to take a step back more easily.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, Especially just be like being able to do it kind of off the cuff in a playtest session where it's just like, you know what? For this one, let's just ignore the set collection stuff. Let's just play all the other pieces and see how it feels. And it might be like you're talking about where it's like, oh yeah, that actually felt pretty good. Or sometimes, you don't really even notice the difference. Or in some cases, it might be like, I don't know, the game felt flat without that thing. It felt like there wasn't that extra little piece to keep your attention or something like that.
mhm.
So you can
And
learn a
that's
lot.
well, and you can learn a lot in like a short period of time. Like I did the playtest with that game without the color theory, and that took like well, it took 5 minutes to realize that like I didn't need to have it, but it took me 4 years to get to that point of just playing it without the thing. But so like that 5 minutes was like, whoa, I've done way more on this game in that 5 minutes than I did in 4 years.
Hmm.
So just put it to the table, see if it works, and if it doesn't, you wasted 5 or 10 minutes. But if it does, then whoa, you got an answer.
Yeah, it's really good.
That one was a hard one. It was my game that made people like most flip the table. Like I learned that people didn't know about the rainbow. But
Oh,
that's game design. Like you learn whatever like all the things that you think are common knowledge. Like I thought it was common knowledge the order of the colors in the rainbow,
uh-huh.
and that is not. It is definitely not. That made people rage out and I don't know, it was a weird design. But I took that part out and now no table flipping. It's perfect.
Yeah, there's definitely when you're doing playtesting for something, you definitely start to notice like things that you assumed were common knowledge uh or even that are like, oh, this feels intuitive. So like it'll just make sense. And then you playtest it with people and they'll have completely different responses to things, like what they think is intuitive or like what they think is common knowledge or not. And it's really eye-opening, honestly, the like to show just how different we all are. Because you could go into something being like, well, yeah, everyone that I know knows this thing, and I know this thing, and I don't even remember learning this thing. So clearly, everyone knows this thing. And then you go into like a playtest with new people, and they're just like have no idea what you're talking about, and it's just like, oh, okay, interesting. Where did my bias come from?
Yeah, so I have a good story for that one. Well, I worked on this game Big Easy Busking. It was about um, like being a street musician in New Orleans. And
Ooh,
yeah, I mean, very particular. I do weird things when they're not, cute cuddly animals with heavy games.
I'm
Um
into it so far.
yeah. So I was sending that out to reviewers, and what I learned is that not everyone knows about Mardi Gras. Like, I could basically, like, based on the review where they either said, like, "Is the game thematic or not?" Like, the people that lived in New Orleans said, like, "It's super thematic." But the people that were, like, on the West Coast were like, "This is a really dry theme, like, how does anything work together?" Um,
Hmm.
and then I was like, "Oh, yeah, I would know about Mardi Gras because I grew up, along the Mississippi River and, they just celebrated Mardi Gras because the boats and stuff."
Hmm.
And you learn things like that, and you can, like, try to, like, counter that. Like, what I ended up doing was just putting in a bunch of facts about New Orleans and how things work and, like, why there's beads. Like, why would you have beads in New Orleans? Well, there's specific reasons. Um, so it's things like that you might never, like, I grew up, everyone celebrated, Mardi Gras. There's king cake, all the colors, like, who knows what is common knowledge and what isn't.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like there's a lot of different cultural things like that that it would seem so obvious that everyone would know it if if it's always been a part of your life. But then someone who's only ever seen it through like other forms of media stuff, like at a very shallow level of what they've seen and why these things happen, they wouldn't really have all that context. It's interesting that it can be um, educational in a way. Like you can learn a lot from playing games. I actually think back to my childhood where I learned a lot of new words and concepts from playing games, like playing Magic the Gathering growing up, for instance. You learn a ton of just really strange vocabulary that, a child would have not encountered otherwise, because there's just all of these different concepts and story beats and things that you wouldn't run into in like everyday life or uh, children's media a lot of the time. In fact, I remember there was a number of words. So I was like a terrible at reading and spelling and stuff as a kid. Um, but there was like a few really specific words that are hard to spell that I knew how to spell them because I had seen them on magic cards or other like game components and stuff. So yeah, you can actually learn a lot from playing games. Um, and I think for something like that, like you're talking about of how do we make this theme for Mardi Gras kind of work for people and gel for people and make sense to them? Like, how much can we teach them about that to get them to understand it? But also, how much can we teach them before it just feels like homework?
Yeah,
Because not many people enjoy doing homework.
yeah, there's definitely a line in, like, just get the bare minimums or whatever, like get fun facts or something like that. Don't try to teach, like, the whole history of something or go too far in depth because then, there's a reason why there's the rumor that educational games aren't fun.
Hmm.
Yeah. You can make a fun educational game. You just have to do it in the right sort of way.
Yeah, you have to engage uh, your players' specific needs. It's hard also because, like I mentioned earlier, with so many people having different experiences and different, things that are common knowledge to them, like, people learn in very different ways as well. So, it's really hard to even make teaching a game or teaching, an experience or a theme difficult, because what works for many players won't work for others.
Yeah. Like, I've done a lot of blind play testing over the years, and it's just really fascinating, like, watching people read and, like, how everyone reads slightly differently, but,
Mhm.
like, they don't know. Like, some people don't read captions on images, but they don't know that they're not doing it.
Yeah. I noticed that a lot too. There's there's a lot of players that, whether they're conscious of it or not, will completely omit things that are like in parentheses, for instance, or sometimes italic words. Like if there's like a line of text that's in italics or something, some players will just completely ignore it. They won't read it out loud. Maybe I don't know if they're like assuming that it's, not real or something, or it's not relevant, but there's a lot of that like not reading captions or just overlooking parentheticals or the other one that I've seen a lot is starting to read a rule. Their brain processes what they've read so far and they think they understand it, and then they'll stop reading the sentence, but they'll stop reading right before like something that changes the meaning of the rule, or in a lot of cases, that literally answers the question that their brain has come up with already. Like they'll
Mhm.
start reading a rule and they'll go, wait, well, what about in this instance? And like literally, if they had read the next three words, they already have their answer.
Yeah, it's so, just watching people read and understand it can be, like, so crazy. Like,
Hmm.
another part of it is that some people learn through hearing. Like,
Yeah.
they can't, um like, them just reading a sentence, like, in their head or however people read, um, they might be confused. But, like, I've had it so many times where I'm like, "Oh, like, can you read that card out loud?" Like, when somebody has a question, and they read it out loud, they hear it, and they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, it works like this." Um
Hmm.
so it's just we're all so different, and, like, you don't unless you've, like, looked into it and been like, "Oh, okay, well, what is the best way for me personally to learn? Is it, is it reading? Is it, listening? Is it doing?" Like, we each have a thing that we're better at, but, unless, like, your school or somebody told you to figure it out, you might not know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely really important. I'm almost the opposite of what you were just talking about, where like if someone reads me a card, I can't process the information even remotely. Like I have to read it for myself. And the same with like learning game rules. It's really easy for me to just pick up a rule book and read it and then understand the game. But if someone's trying to teach me a game, if the explanation is more than like 40 seconds long, I literally have no clue what is happening. And we would have been better off if you just went, okay, it's turn one, it's your turn. Here's the things you can do, and I had zero context for what was going on. I would still have learned the game better doing that than you trying to explain a game for me that takes 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I am also completely like that. Like, you give me the rule book, I will learn the game. It just so happens that my partner likes to listen. So if
Mm,
I read the rule book to him, then we both are so happy. But like whenever he tries to like read the rule book at me, like I can't hear him or like I can't understand words that I have to like
yeah,
hear, and then he doesn't learn that well because he has to, like, read through all the things, and it takes so
yeah,
much longer for, like, a very simple reason.
yeah. It's interesting. Just to circle this back down to game design, because we kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there. Thinking about those aspects of it uh, as a designer, or whoever you are that might be making a rule book for something, like how you're presenting that information and how players are going to consume and digest that information, and how they might have different ways of wanting to learn something is really important. So like when and how you choose to use diagrams or visuals, for instance, in your rule book. Um, I've noticed there's a very big difference between presenting rules in a very casual way versus presenting them in a very technical way. Like, there's definitely certain players that, you know, they don't want to know all the fluff. They don't want to know why a thing is a thing. They just want to know the rules. But there's definitely a large group of players that, like, if you presented your rule book as though it was you sitting at the table with them, telling them the rules, that suddenly becomes way more digestible to them, and it's easier for them to learn. So it's definitely one of those things like doing playtests in person with people, or I mean, on Discord or something where you can hear them react to things and like watch their learning process can be very, very powerful for creating your rule set and your design, because you get to see all of the different ways that um, players, try to learn your game and try to interact with it. You get to see all of the mistakes that they make. Which really powerful, by the way, is if you're playtesting something and you don't, interrupt to correct their mistakes. You allow them to like make those mistakes and see what happens with your game. Because in a lot of cases, a play mistake can just go unnoticed and it won't actually disrupt the game that much. Um, in some cases, it might, destroy your entire design. And if that's the case and those mistakes get made, then you have to kind of look at your rules, how is the game being taught, and make sure that those can get caught, like those mistakes can get caught. Um, but then, yeah, it helps to just kind of see where mistakes get made a lot and like how people want to learn the game. And you can kind of develop your rules and your system to accommodate that. Because ultimately, you're not going to be there when they're playing the game. Like when the game is said and done and it's out and they buy it off of a shelf, you're not coming in the box to teach them the game. So finding all of those things ahead of time and uh, making sure that they can have a good experience, even if they get some rules wrong, and even if they uh, aren't fully understanding the strategies or all of the technical details of it. If they're having a good time, they're having a good time, even if they're playing it slightly wrong. But catching those big mistakes that just wreck the game or wreck their player experience is, I think, part of the big piece of that. Um, but yeah, I think we're having a little bit of technical trouble, so I guess I will just wax poetic about some more stuff here. Um,
I might be back. I don't know.
oh, I think Carla's back. Carla's back.
Yeah. Yay! So, yeah, some technical thing happened, but then it fixed itself, so who knows what.
Good
But
thing I
if
was talking about rules forever.
yes, it was perfect. I was like panicking, and then you were still talking when I got back in. I was like, great, fantastic. I didn't like ruin the end of it. Um, but yeah, rules are like, I mean, we could talk about rules for 2 days,
That's
probably.
like a whole bunch of other panels.
Yeah, it's so hard to get rules that are good for everyone. Um, so you have to make rules that are good for pretty good for most people, and that's as good as you can get.
Mhm.
If anyone has any questions or anything, let us know because we're gonna be finishing off this pretty soon. Oh, somebody did have a question. So Craig Maloney said, "How do you know if a game is beyond help and perhaps needs to be reworked?"
I think I think we've lost Carla again. I don't see that question, so I'm not entirely sure what it's gonna be. Alright, so it's how do you know if a game, is unsavable and needs to be reworked at a fundamental level? It's a very good question. It's definitely hard to say. If you're going into a game, over and over, you're testing your design again and again, and you're finding that the experience just isn't fun, or um, it's just not working how you want it to. So I've actually an example of this for all of those different tactical games that I was trying to make. One of them was a it was it was one of the precursors to Artisans, where it was very dungeon crawly. It had this like modular map setup thing going on, and uh how it was resolving um its combat and all of its tactical stuff was very specific. But one of the things that I found is, as I was playtesting it and I was trying to resolve each of these small issues that I had with the design, what I found is that I, as a designer, just didn't want to play it anymore. Like, we had only played it, a handful of times because we were just kind of early playtesting and trying to figure something out. But when me, as the person making this thing, doesn't even want to play it anymore, doesn't even want to playtest it anymore, that's like a massive red flag of like something is very wrong here. So like that was a great sign for me to just be like, all right, I just need to drop this thing and try something completely different, on a fundamental level. It might not be that obvious, of course. Like in that case, it's like I looked at it and I realized I just wasn't having fun. Um, Obviously, it might not be that much of a obvious flag for you to figure that out. But that is something you should check in with yourself every now and then. Like, are you enjoying your game? Because like ultimately, it's a game. You should be having fun. And even as the designer, uh, even if you're making a game that's like not necessarily the type of game that you would play in your free time, it should still be enjoyable. Like you're gonna make a much better game if you're enjoying the thing that you're creating. Uh, so like f- taking that moment to kind of check in with yourself, think about what felt good for me to play. Yeah, like definitely you want to know what felt good for your playtesters and you want their feedback, but remember that you are also a player in those moments. And if it's not, if it doesn't feel good for you either, then that's a great sign that you can, try to change what's there. And I think that also comes down to identifying that core loop that I was talking about, specifically because this question was, what if it needs to change on a fundamental level? So, like, if you enjoyed some aspects of your game, but not all of them, and you think about which pieces you do enjoy and which pieces you don't, if you find that it's that core game loop that you're not enjoying, you're really just enjoying some of the, frills and stuff around the edges, that's a good sign that like, well, that core loop needs to be something different on a fundamental level. But maybe some of these other pieces are still salvageable. Maybe they'll work with something else in some other way. Something like that. Carla, are you back?
Ah, I'm back. Yes.
Hey, welcome.
Yay. Yeah, so I wouldn't say that like anything like a game is like permanently like unsalvageable. Like, well,
Sure.
with that one game that I was talking about, like it was called Drapple. Like I just kept putting it back on the shelf
Mm-hmm.
year after year and like, like at different times I was like, should I just get rid of it? Like, why do I even still have this thing? But I think, like, just distancing yourself from it, like,
Mm-hmm.
definitely does a lot of help. And designing other things, like, Nikki talked about, like, figure out what part that you like and just make some other game with that small part and see if, like, that's really the part you like, or, like, if the other one, even needed that part. Like, figure out what you really, like, want to do, and work on that thing. I
Yeah.
think, the hardest part of all of game design, I think, is finishing something. It is so hard to finish it, or call it done. Um,
Mhm.
so you have to do things that motivate you. So if you are most motivated by this other idea, go for the other idea for a bit and then wait till your motivation comes back to like stripping down that other game that you don't know what to do with. Like, if you are actually motivated to work on it, then there's something there that you think is really cool or that you enjoy, like, continue working on it. But just, like, make sure to take a step back and go like, "Hey, am I just torturing myself? Like, do I like this game? Or, you know, should I just move on, try something else for a bit, and then I'll be able to see what I like about it in, a month or a year or, in my case, 4 years."
Yeah. Yeah. Eh,
Okay, so this panel is almost done. Thank you all so much for watching, even though my computer kept messing up. Most likely because my partner is playing Rocket League and our internet can't handle both, and he can't handle going an hour without Rocket League. You know, the problems you have in life. But whatever. Nikki Valens is amazing.
Well, thank you.
Where can I find you at?
Yeah, I hang out on Twitter mostly is my easiest public access to me. My Twitter is at Valens116, so it's just my last name, Valens 116. So I talk about playtesting and just kind of gauge audience interest in different things, and I'll announce any of my games or whatever, or I just post like random memes or cats or whatever on there as well. So feel free to stop in there and hang out with me. I also stream on Twitch every now and then. Right now, it's mostly just been Saturday mornings. Um, I'm Central US time, so Saturday morning for me. Uh, where I've just been playing some various video games or story games on there. But yeah, how about you, Carla? Where can they find you?
So I'm also on Twitter. I love Twitter. At Weird Giraffes with an S. My company website is weirdgiraffegames.com, but I write a lot at weirdgiraffegames.com/Carla. I write about game publishing, design. I interview amazing people like Nikki, and a lot of other people as well. And I will eventually get back to that once I stop being, completely burnt out by this pandemic. Maybe it'll be next week. We'll see. But there's a lot of content out there at the moment, too, because I was not burnt out for a year and a half ago. So, yeah. But thank you all for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We love obviously talking about game design, and we'd love to hear from you. So yeah, just do that on Twitter because we both like Twitter.
Yeah.